On Just a Number today, we are featuring Gampel, diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 47, proving that life's most important discoveries can happen at any age. Her story is one of resilience, it's one of self-discovery, and it's a powerful reminder that it's never too late to understand yourself better. We're going to dive into her journey of living with undiagnosed ADHD, how it changed her life, and the lessons that she learned along the way. If you've ever felt like something just isn't adding up, her experience is sure to keep you inspired, looking for answers, no matter where you are in life. This is a conversation you don't want to miss, so stay tuned. Here's Just a Number. Age? It's just part of the story. Whether you're getting a head start or reaching new heights later on, it's all about what you do with your time. These are the stories of people proving that it's never too early or too late. This is Just a Number. Hello, once again. It's Daniel here. This is Just a Number, and I'm thrilled today to have another special guest. I am joined by Gampel. I've known a very long time, but you know what? I don't think I know nearly enough about her story, and that's what this show is all about today, about what is a very interesting journey that is going to highlight, I think, the learning that we have over the course of our lives that keeps going. And I'm just really happy to learn more about your journey. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. Me too. So why don't you tell everybody a bit just about, who you are, where you're from, and we're going to jump right into where that's led to where we are right now.
All right. Okay. Fundamentally, I guess I'm a, middle-aged mom living in the burbs, who looks totally normal, but doesn't feel that way much of the time. And yeah, I don't know what aspects of my story are particularly interesting. So where do we start?
Well, so I mean, I know you from, I mean, we've done work together for years and years and years through, you've worked at York University in Toronto, and you've held different roles there where we've been able to cross paths multiple times. And I've really known you, I think, primarily professionally, I think through different interactions we've had, but we've gotten to know each other at a personal level here and there. And um, I'm really curious about, I guess, the then and the now in a lot of senses, because everybody goes through not necessarily a transformation, but I think everybody goes through growth over the course of their careers, over the course of their lives. Um, and when we were initially connecting, you were made a reference even to elementary school, that you wanted to be a lawyer, and your schooling and how good a student you were, and all these things that you went through. And I'm just curious about, maybe we could start there, like where you were at when you were a kid, when you were going through school, and what interested you and what led to, I guess, where you're at right now. I think everything kind of connects and finds its way to where we are, but you're a different person today than you were back then.
Sounds good. Okay. So, I grew up in Montreal and was kind of a kid who had it all. Um, you know, the world was my oyster, and a huge amount of of potential. So I think one example is, in grade 6, when I was graduating from elementary school, we all had to write in our yearbooks, what we want to be when we grow up. And so I knew I was supposed to be a doctor or a lawyer. And so I chose lawyer, and I wrote, I'm going to be a lawyer. And my teachers, who thought I was, brilliant and so capable, said, like, no, you're not just going to be a lawyer. Here comes the judge. And looking back, I didn't take that, that felt like pressure as opposed
Mm.
to something that really felt good.
Right.
Um,
When they thought it was like a motivation, and we're really going to pump her up to reach higher kind of thing.
right, right. But school was easy. School, was great. And um, I did very well, right? I, went through high school and was on the student council, was valedictorian, was very involved, and did, quite well academically and extracurricularly. Socially, always some struggles, which I learned about a little bit later. Um, and and then I did 2 degrees in business and, did very well. I graduated from a top 10 US school, with a 4.0
Hmm.
in my MBA. A career path has not taken um, the path that many that knew me would have expected. And I'm trying to, at this point in middle age, uncover why, what part of it was my own choice based on my values and my needs, and what part of it was perhaps related to undiagnosed ADHD. So I got diagnosed with ADHD at 47 years old. I'm
Mm.
now 48, and just coming to terms with what that has meant in terms of the impact on my professional journey, my personal journey, and how can I use that, in the next chapter,
Hmm.
to do well and, make meaning for myself and for the world.
That's really, I mean, we're gonna dive really deep into that because it's so interesting that, you talk about basically you had it all. I mean, and not to put words in your mouth, but things were going great. And on the surface, I think, like you said, people might have had expectations or people might have, kind of charted your path for you in their minds. And maybe throughout that, there was something that felt a bit off or felt a bit missing, and you didn't know until literally a year ago. You're
Right.
47 years old. And was that, when you were diagnosed, was that a moment of clarity for you? Or was it more a moment of like, holy crap, like, what is this? And this doesn't happen to somebody when they're 47 years old.
Right. It was an aha moment, and it was so reassuring. And I still sometimes don't believe it because, when I tell people, I have ADHD, you get a lot of, well, everyone has ADHD, or, you know,
Right.
this is crazy. But, I had a child who had ADHD. And as I was kind of going about my journey, researching on the internet how to help her, I uncovered a lot that let me know that women and ADHD, girls and ADHD is not something that was studied until the past few years. And so the symptoms present themselves differently for women and girls than they do for men and boys. And so we have often flown flown through the crack, been through the cracks, right? In fact, when I look back, it took about 5 years of advocating to get my daughter a diagnosis. So I had no idea that I was doing this investigation for me. And then I found out that the hormonal changes that occur around menopause exacerbate
Mhm.
ADHD symptoms. And at that point, I started saying, maybe I should go for a diagnosis. I'd actually been I had tried to get diagnosed 20 years ago.
Hmm.
And, they said you've got some symptoms, but not enough to classify you as ADHD. Right. And I trusted the expert, it was a psychiatrist doing this assessment. And so, they must know better than I do. And so,
I know
okay,
the feeling.
we've ruled out
I know the
ADHD. I'm
feeling.
like,
Yeah.
okay, right. Exactly. Yeah. We just talked about that, about, doctors telling you you're okay when you're not.
Right.
Right. And the pieces of the puzzle aren't fitting in. So when I went to do this assessment, it was funny. They did the same assessment that they did for my daughter when she was in grade 2, except they didn't give me like the little rewards that they gave her. Um, and I sat through the entire experience, and it was like 20 hours feeling like a fraud, right?
Hmm.
And feeling almost guilty for, my insurance provider, fortunately, covering the cost of this, expensive assessment. Um, and I was really, really nervous when I went to get the report. And when I had the meeting where they gave me the report, they said, we knew within the first 5 minutes that
Oh,
you have
wow.
ADHD.
Hmm.
I was like, oh my gosh, in 47 years, I had no idea. And you knew in 5 minutes of meeting me. And that's, I think, thanks to the fact that we started to look at girls and look at women, and understand that symptoms, and experiences of ADHD present themselves differently.
I mean, I think it's pretty clear outside looking in, the world has evolved and come to accept the reality of this more so today than 20 years ago, for sure. I don't know if the psychiatrist that you met with 20 years ago was just living in more of a, blinders on world about this sort of thing, or if it just wasn't really researched enough at that point. But for you, I mean, that must have been a moment of relief in some respect. Despite, whether or not, you felt like a fraud being in there. I think when you know something's wrong and everyone's telling you you're fine, you want someone to tell you something's wrong. Because you're
Yes.
like, what am I crazy? Like, if it's not that, then what? Then I'm still sort of spending another 20 years wandering and looking for what's wrong. So was there, as much as you don't want to be diagnosed with anything, you want everything to be perfect. Nobody's perfect, right? And really there's, I think, in some ways, and maybe you can speak to this, there's some beauty to what ADHD is in itself anyway, right? It's not like this is a burden you should bear. It's something that you can own and understand more now. So was there some relief when
It
they
was
told you?
it it was a huge relief. It was a huge relief. And it helped me move from a place of shame that I hadn't reached my potential to um, acceptance. And I think that was really, really key. So every time I struggled with something, every time I looked at my, messy house or all of the projects I'd left unfinished, or, all of those things, I was like, oh, my brain is partially to blame for this. And I cut myself all kinds of slack. I was like,
Hmm.
I don't have to clean my car. I don't have to clean my house. I don't need to finish my projects because I have ADHD, right? That was the first stage and it lasted for about a year,
Hmm.
right? And it was problematic.
Yeah.
It led to very messy circumstances,
You're like, everything's fine now. That's great.
personally and professionally, right?
Hmm.
And, in learning some of the other pieces of ADHD, emotional regulation, being hard, understanding social cues, being harder, I just, again, cut myself all kinds of slack. I don't need to be professional because I don't do well with social cues. I don't need to, manage my emotions. I can just emote and explode with everyone I love because I've got this diagnosis. So there was a year of like relief and leaning into it and creating like utter chaos
Hmm.
in my
It's
life.
almost pushing the needle too far in the other direction now, where
Exactly.
this is a get out of jail free card for everything.
Exactly,
Hmm.
exactly. And so I did that for a while. Um, and then at one point, I guess I needed to, I realized like, wait a second, this isn't going away. I started on, the stimulants and the, meds and, got myself a coach and, did all the things. And even with those, I realized it's not enough until I realized that I'm going to have to learn how to live with this and how to be the person I want to be with this diagnosis, figure out what are my superpowers that I can embrace, because there are amazing superpowers, right?
Hmm.
Creativity and innovation and being able to be the one to step in a time of, crisis. Like these are superpowers and they energize me. They don't phase me.
Yeah.
Um, but some of those regular, ordinary day-to-day life things can be challenging, but they still have to get done.
Right.
So I've
Well, that's it. I mean, every superpower power comes at the to the detriment of something else. You put something great in, and maybe you've got to sacrifice or pay more attention to something that might seem ordinary to other people. So taking a step back, because I don't want to take for granted that maybe people out there have a misconception about what ADHD itself is. Um, if you were to give, the elevator pitch to someone who doesn't understand, and maybe they hear ADHD and they think this is only something that affects kids in school. Like I hear about it, the kid who's not paying attention or whatever. You just talked about how great a student you were. Obviously, that's a bit of a misnomer. What would be the Coles Notes ADHD to somebody who's sitting there saying, this is all really interesting, but I have no idea what she's talking about?
Right. Okay, let me see if I can characterize that.
It can be longer than an elevator pitch if it
Yeah.
needs to be. Yeah.
Okay. So, ADHD stands for attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. I don't know. I don't know that I like the final D. I don't think disorder is necessarily the
I
right word,
agree.
because in the right swimming in the right ponds, it's actually not a disorder. But with the way our lives have evolved in, today's day and age, it is a disorder because it prevents functioning in, according to the norms that are expected of us in society. So, the first A and D, attention deficit, is, I think, one of the things that really trips people up and gets people um, less likely to be diagnosed correctly,
Mm,
because we have a deficit of attention in things that are boring to us. But when we're interested, we do this thing called hyperfocus, right? Which means, like, we can be totally into it and we can do so much more than, say, a neurotypical brain can do when we're interested.
mhm.
So it is really hard to pay attention in a Zoom meeting, right? Because they're
Except for this
slow,
one, of course.
except for
Except for
this
this
one. Yeah, this one's, of course, it's really fun. But we like, one of the main symptoms actually for women and girls is talking, right? Talking a lot, talking quickly, talking about inappropriate things. So this is we're totally comfortable here, right?
for sure.
But with this, there's an inability to pay attention in certain places, and then this sort of hyper focus, going all in with so much energy on things that are interesting to you. So to an outsider, someone with ADHD will just appear really unpredictable and really challenging. Like, you have a meeting with them one day and they're totally on and they're with it and they follow up and they're amazing. And then another day, it's like, who is this person? Is it the same person? So
Mm.
there's a real sort of up and down, and that will often depend on, whether there's an interest in what's going on, and whether the speed of the interaction is at the pace that the brain, can process at. So the thing that I've learned is that my ADHD brain anyways, because no two ADHD brains are the same, processes things really quickly. So I'm a voracious reader. I read audiobooks and, consumer of um, podcasts and, the occasional YouTube video. I listen to them on double time,
Mhm.
right? I don't know if you listen to them
My
on,
my
on
my my
double.
wife does the same. My brain can't work that way, but I get it because I mean, hey, you're consuming double the stuff,
Well,
or half the
exactly.
time, or
Right.
half the
And
time.
it's amazing. But the interesting thing is, if I put it at regular speed, I fall asleep. Like, I actually can't process it.
Interesting.
So, when my partner walks in and he's like, what is that? I'm like, oh, I can explain that to you. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
So, right. So that would be sort of one of the things, is our brains are always going and they're going really quickly. And so the ability to sort of be present and be appropriate in a neurotypical world, can seem challenging. So we can maybe look like we're there, especially for girls, but kind of be off in the clouds mentally.
Hmm.
Um, some of the other things, I'll just give you some quick sort of things that come together with ADHD. A difficulty with social cues. So, struggling socially, often making like really quick, fast friendships because of this sort of oversharing, communicating, but not having the structures and the executive function in place to maintain those friendships, and maintain sort of social appropriateness. Also can be combined with a lot of self-doubt. Like, we're intensely aware, and there's something called RSD, or rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is actually when we've perceived rejection, or when we perceive that we've not behaved in a way that we should have, we experience that a feeling of dysphoria, like really, really deep, like discomfort, disdain for ourselves, self-hatred, self-loathing, because we're like, oh my gosh, like, I said something that I shouldn't have said in that meeting, and someone made, a face, and I think that they don't like me, or they don't trust me anymore. I've damaged my credibility. That face might have actually had nothing to do
Right.
with me, but that can be really, really damaging.
Yeah.
Um, and
So
really
you
hard to deal
tell
with.
yourself a story and roll with it. Is a big part of that, do you internalize feelings like that, or is that something that you're more inclined to address head on, maybe with misinformation, or is that just something that you kind of wear quietly and it really tears at you, or is that element of it different?
No, it definitely sort of eats you up. And I'll, I'll give an example. With a former manager, um, you know, I kept saying like, I need reassurance that you're not going to fire me,
Mm,
right? And she's like, you know, if I was going to fire you would know, right?
right,
Right?
right.
Um, and I'm like, but you don't say that. But if someone has like a face that conveys, a dislike that might have nothing to do with me. I mean, it might have to do with me. Um, I would kind of focus on that and maybe get a little bit fixated, and then that could kind of stall the ability to move forward with other things that are productive,
Well,
right?
and I mean that as an isolated case, even. I mean, you've been an overachiever. Maybe your expectation of yourself outweighs the expectations that others actually do have of you, where you're doing an amazing job, but you're like, I know that's not my best. And then immediately every face looks like, oh crap, they know it too.
Right,
Right? When
right.
in fact they're just like, Allie's amazing. Why does she look so uncomfortable right now?
Right, right. And when uncomfortable, we turn to talking. So blah, 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 right?
Mhm.
And then, oh my gosh, did I talk too much? So there's a lot of, there's a lot of self-doubt. There's a lot of, questioning. So, rejection sensitivity, some sensory issues like being very, very conscious of discomfort in my body, right?
Mhm.
So if it's too hot, like that feels more oppressive than it might for someone else, or too cold or uncomfortable, um, things like that. Um, Social cues, intensely focusing on special interests, um, you know, being sort of stimulated by different things as they're happening. And I think one of the other things that's huge is like routines, and adherence to routines is really hard because the ADHD
Mhm.
brain lives in the moment, right?
Right.
So I remember, doing something years ago, about 10 years ago, I was in a different job, and I made a judgment call on something. And I remember my manager called me in, and she actually was trained as a coach. So she was about to sort of give me some criticism. And then I saw her take a deep breath, and she was like, what were you thinking? Right? Just what were you thinking? And I still reflect on that moment. And I wasn't thinking, right?
Mhm.
In my brain, it's I do to think as opposed to think to do. So
Right.
the idea of planning is harder,
Right.
right? Now, coming out of that year of, self-acceptance and, I don't need a plan because I've got this, disability. Now I'm learning how to figure out how to plan, when to plan, what supports do I need? How can I lean into, colleagues at work? How can I lean into my partner, my children? What are the structure, my coach, medication? So what are all the things that I can do to make
Mhm.
sure that I can do enough planning to get by? But it definitely takes more energy, to
For sure.
plan than it does to do.
Well, I mean, it seems like this is like it's a condition of extremes, ups and downs. Like there's no kind of straight line approach to really anything. It sounds like, things are either really, really high or really, really low. And the in between, maybe that's part of the challenge now that you've identified it, or it's been identified for you, that is that part of the quest to get closer to the middle, like to get more to a baseline? Or is that really, do you lean into the, I know that the highs are high and the lows are low, and just acknowledging that is kind of success enough to you?
I mean, acknowledging is definitely important. And I think that acknowledging where we're at and the way we feel is the key to getting over it,
Hmm.
right? So if people don't even acknowledge where they're at, what they're feeling, it tends to just build up to the point of, a breakdown. Because it just adds. So, I've had to teach myself, you know, okay, I'm bored now. I acknowledge that I feel bored. boredom is really hard for me
Mm.
to do. And so what do I want to do? Do I want to sit in the boredom? Is there something productive that I can do, like going for a walk, going for a run, calling a friend? Is there something unproductive that I can do, like eating a tub of ice cream? And those and both choices happen. They definitely do.
You're like, I can do
But
both.
I can do both.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely, the highs are wonderful, and it's lovely to be there. I think there's often a confusion or a lot of a coincidence, a comorbidity with bipolar disorder, which is sort of highs and lows. These mental health diagnoses are not, they're not unique. They're all sort of part,
They're
I'm
related.
learning,
Yeah.
they're all related. And,
Yeah.
ADHD and autism can look very similar and can be similar. And some people have both, some people don't. And how we diagnose kind of changes, evolves as the medical profession, learns more.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
So how would you say that this might be kind of too deep of a question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How would you say your perception of what success is has changed now that you have a better understanding of yourself? And I'm not even calling it ADHD anymore. It's ADH because I agree that last D
Right.
is a waste of
I
time.
like that.
Um, you know, you went through, 46 and a half years or whatever it is with sort of expectations, and maybe you kind of taught yourself to share them or that that was what was right. Have things shifted since the diagnosis to you of what success actually looks like?
Yes, it definitely has. And let me go back and sort of walk through my career path. Um, because I think it's sort of like I'll talk about some of the ways that, you know, I got to where I thought I should be. But there were missing pieces to the puzzle that didn't let me get where I should have gotten,
Hmm.
right? And I'll give you that example. So I talked about, people told me I should be a lawyer or a doctor. I was going to be a lawyer. So I got it. I graduated from my undergrad, from a BCom. Um, Probably did the most creative BCom ever, right? I did a major in entrepreneurship and I minored in psychology, and I did an exchange in France, and somehow, you know, convinced the dean that, my French art and culture classes that I took overseas should count towards my business course count, because I was living in Quebec and that was going to be important in Quebec. So, everything that I did was sort of very creatively done, right? It just was never a sort of straight and narrow path.
Yeah.
And, none of it mattered very much because I was an undergrad and then I was going to apply to law school. So I applied to law school and I got into 9 out of the 10 law schools that I applied to. I always joke, I made my mother cry twice in my life. Once, tears of joy when she saw all of my acceptance letters coming in, those thick envelopes, and, tears of sadness when in about August 20th, before I was supposed to start law school in September, I declined all of them,
Hmm.
including the two that we had paid, the deposit, to have me attend.
Ooh.
Um,
I thought you were going to say that Tears of Sadness was for the 1 out of the 10 that said no. I'm like, oh, that would be a stretch.
well, interestingly, we talked about rejection sensitivity dysphoria. That one really got at me, right?
For
And
sure.
while someone else might say, I got into 9 schools, that's 90%, I'm really happy. For me, getting rejected from that one school really ate at me.
Hmm.
I was like, if I wasn't good enough to get into that school, then am I going to be successful as a lawyer? Well, maybe I don't want to be a lawyer. And, I started catastrophizing, right?
Did
Which is
that
also,
impact saying no to the other nine, you think? The
it
the one
impacted
that's
100%, a hundred
interesting.
percent. And, and then, like we see on social media, what happened, social media didn't exist at the time. This was 1997, right? I sought out confirmation. So I started going and doing, I didn't know they were called informational interviews at the time, but I started going and talking to every lawyer and law student that I could find in my networks and asking what it was like. And, through that process said like, no, law isn't for me, right?
Mm.
It's actually a choice that I regret because, I was 20, I could have done it. And I think I didn't do it out of fear that, I wouldn't be good at it. I also didn't do as well as I wanted to on, the LSAT, which was the standardized test. So,
Yep.
um, I'd been, a top student, and I scored in the 76th percentile in the LSAT. Most people would be really pleased with that, and it was
For
enough to
sure.
get me into nine law schools. But it made me question, will I be able to hack it? Will I be able to, do a good job? And am I suited for it? Like, it's supposed to be an aptitude test. So maybe my aptitude is, not right for law school. So, um, I was always a little bit afraid of technology, I've had to embrace it. But in 97, there was the last opportunity to write the GMAT for business school on paper and pencil. And then it was going to be converting to computerized.
Hmm.
So I said to myself, let me just write it for fun. So I wrote it for fun, and I scored in the 98th percentile. Right. So
Wow.
there's my aptitude, right? There's aptitude. Okay, 76th percentile. I'm not a 76% student. And 98th percentile, like that's kind of more me. I must be meant for business. So it's like, okay, great, amazing. I've got this BCom, very creative BCom degree, and now I'll go and do an MBA. And when I do an MBA, it will tell me what I want to, what I'm going to be when I grow up.
Hmm.
But the problem with MBAs is you need work experience first. So graduated from university. Well, so I started researching what would be the best work experience to obtain in order to get into an MBA program. And the answer was consulting,
Hmm.
right? So I found my way into a management consulting and started my career there. And it was really tough. It looked great on paper, had a good job, got to wear a business suit. Wearing a business suit felt really oppressive. We talk about, now I understand sort of sensory issues, but wearing a business suit was really hard. I would ride my bike to work. Like, sustainable commuting was not a thing in 1998, and try to do the work. And it was really hard for, to do the work, to fit in to the norms. And so I was doing okay. I always kind of got through, but I was 6 months behind in getting the promotion that most people got. I found my way to alternate career paths, even within consulting, like spending a 6 month secondment working at, our corporate training center, which was in the US, and delivering training and learning. That's always been something I've really enjoyed.
Mhm.
So, consulting, I was definitely not, we talk about aptitude for law. I didn't go into law because I thought I didn't have the aptitude for it. But, consulting, I was definitely not good at it.
Hmm.
But it got me exactly where I wanted to go. I survived it, and got into, MBA school. Um, and it was interesting because, I thought, I should go to Harvard, of course. Harvard rejected me.
Very
Um,
nice.
right. Not very nice. I mean, it was a blessing that Harvard rejected me, because I don't think
Hmm.
that's an environment I would have been happy in. But a lot was informed at that point in my life. I lost my father. So I lost
Hmm.
my father to pancreatic cancer, and it was and he'd been like my best friend and very similar to me. And so it started to make me question everything that I thought about life. And it made me question kind of the shoulds. So now there's this real dichotomy between what matters, what's important, what are my values. So I, went to go visit potential MBA schools, and asked people, at the time my father was not dead, but he was, in the process of dying. How do you do business school when, you have a dying parent? Like, that was my main concern.
Yeah.
So I ended up deferring business school for a year. My dad passed, and kind of got myself together, and then went into business school, and and went through that, and again found creative ways to navigate business school, and do that, and graduated with a 4.0 in business school, and again came to this same state of, so what's next? Like, what do I do? I didn't want to go back into consulting, but, I knew that I didn't like, finance was not my thing, right? And after you graduate from a top school, you're supposed to be, an investment banker or a consultant. So
Right.
we crossed out the investment banker side. And I tried to get into an even, a more prestigious consulting firm. It didn't happen, thankfully. And during my MBA, that was 9/11. So, yesterday was September 11th. And, for those of us who are old enough to remember, that was a really pivotal moment
Yeah.
of, of what are we going to do? Um, so my dad's death, September 11th, reframed my ideas of life and work. However, I still had all of this potential that I was supposed to live up to. And, my grade 6 teacher that thought I was, too good to be a lawyer, I had to be a judge.
Yeah.
And so I remember sitting in in the career services office during my MBA, and, them asking me, what do I want to do? And I said, I want to go into strategy consulting. I want to get hired by McKinsey. That's what came out of my mouth. But my heart said, I want your job, right?
Mm.
Like, I want to be a career counselor. Like, that's so much fun, like helping students figure out their path and then get there. Like, that's totally what I want to be. So fast forward, I didn't, I got a job offer, and then I did a bunch of really weird things and didn't end up accepting it. It was in New York. I didn't want to be in New York after 9/11, blah, blah, blah. And so I went back to my old firm. They took me back. I suffered through it for another year until I eventually found my way into the university sector. Um, and that's where, Daniel, you're in my paths probably first crossed,
Right.
when I actually leaned into what I really want to do and got a job in, career counseling, career education for business students at the Career Development Center of
Mhm.
the business school that you attended.
That's right. I was in that business school on 9/11 also. I remember like it was, like it was yesterday. I was telling my kids yesterday. I remember just yeah, but that is where we crossed paths. I don't know if it was at the career center necessarily, but it was definitely I mean,
Yeah. I think we might have met after
I think
your
it was
student days,
probably,
because you were going kind of the sports marketing route, and I was
yeah.
helping students who wanted to get into strategy or consulting. So I don't know if we crossed paths then. We crossed paths a little
Well,
bit
hey.
later. But it's interesting because I was very embarrassed about my choices.
Hmm.
And I wanted to leverage my own sense of embarrassment to help others like me, in business schools who might have been like me, to be okay doing what their heart wants them to do rather than what society or their parents tell them to do.
100%.
And so, I always talked about, like, when I would have the opportunity to speak to classes, I always talked about like the fallacy of the shoulds, right? This idea of we should go into consulting or investment banking because we are, smart enough and have the ability to get there, doesn't mean we should. I used to say, you know, you don't have to go for your roommate's dream job, right? And I
Right.
think I was telling this to students more to convince myself that it was okay, that I was, making those choices because they were better for me. And also because I wasn't able to be successful, in that sort of high-paced, cutthroat business suit consulting world. So
Well, you had lived experience of what felt good, what didn't, and the impact on both sides of that, right? Like, and I think, looking, I mean, hindsight's always 2020, but you know, maybe you weren't getting the promotion ahead of other people and all that, but obviously every experience along the way, I think, has been useful in shaping where you're at. Like none of it was a waste of time. I don't know if you look at it that way and say, I wish I had just started, in career counseling or something like that. I think sometimes you've got to go through the crap to realize it's the crap, right? Because otherwise you never
Absolutely.
know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's really true. And I've been told by my former students that, you know, the the lens that I brought was helpful, and
Mhm.
um yeah.
Well,
But I do want to share one thing that I've actually sort of never shared publicly. So I am going to be really um uh what's it called?
vulnerable.
Um
Or
Yeah,
this
I'm going to be
is
really
I don't know if it's
vulnerable.
a vulnerable
Yeah,
moment.
yeah,
I don't want to put words in your
it's
mouth.
it's a vulnerable moment. And so I was in my dream job, running MBA and BBA career programming, and just, it was such a great balance of one-on-one counseling and workshops integrating in the curriculum. I loved it. I was doing well, and I was in that role for over a decade. I had my two kids. It was fantastic. I managed, I think, what I now know to be my ADHD need for fitness by bicycling to work. People, would see me bicycling even when I was like 7 months pregnant. So a little bit out of the box there. Um, but after over 10 years, there was a change in leadership,
Mm.
and a number of people from within our group got let go, got terminated. And I was one of those. And it was a really unpleasant, horrible experience to have your job closed, especially when you're in your dream job and you think you're doing really well.
Sure.
So that was 10 years ago. And it really threw me through, for a loop, because I've been, you know, doing well, doing what I loved. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people don't talk about, is the fact that, these things happen. Like, people get terminated from jobs. It doesn't mean that they're bad. It doesn't mean that they're, not performing, or not making an impact. It's just things change, the culture
Hmm.
changes, but the impact personally is something that I think we don't talk about enough. So my journey sort of to recovering from that, right? And imagine that coupled with, you know, that rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Right now, I've been rejected from my dream job, right? I didn't even play we had an office lottery pool, and I didn't play in it because I felt that if I won the lottery, I would still go to work. I loved my job so much. I loved my students. I loved my colleagues. So, that's one thing that and that's interesting to say, and to share, especially because I returned to the same
Yeah.
employer, right? So many people don't know about this part of my journey. And I feel proud when I say, I returned to the same employer, not the business school, but another part of the university,
Definitely.
at, several levels higher and making a lot more money. And that's not my current job. That's the job before my current job. Um, and so, but the lesson here is around like rejection and interpretation of rejection, and finding the right ponds to swim in, right? And realizing sometimes the pond changes, right? So maybe you're using this fish analogy, right? Maybe you're a saltwater fish and all the salt goes away, and now you're in a freshwater, just because culture of the organization might have changed. And so suddenly, you can't breathe anymore, right? Or, they don't want, the way your skills or talents.
Yeah.
Um, and that's just part of the journey. And I think it's one we don't talk about enough.
100%. I think that's a super important message people need to hear, because you can't go through the journey without, not forget bumps in the road, like flat out rejection, flat out the opposite of what you're looking for. And in the moment, it's impossible to realistically look in the mirror and say, this is good for me. I get that. Right. And I've been through it, and it sucks. And all you can do is say, what did I do wrong? And oh my God, everything's over now because I was where I wanted to be, nowhere to go but down. Right. But
Right.
you've now, I mean, being on the other side of it, maybe it's an exaggeration to say it's not the best thing that ever happened to you that you got let go, but it was a useful and important moment that, like you said, it's brought you back to the same environment in arguably a much better spot, definitely a better headspace, more understanding of, what's important to you, and everything that goes with that. So, it's kind of the hyper version of learning from your mistakes, because it's not a
Absolutely.
mistake. It's just learning from the bad stuff. Everything has value that we go through, one
Yeah.
life, and
Yeah.
it's not all going to be rainbows and butterflies
Yeah.
for
I
you.
like the saying failing forward,
Yeah.
right? And as a parent, I try to celebrate failures, in my kids, and I actually get concerned when they don't have enough. I think, us helicopter parents spend a lot of time, bubbling our kids and protecting them from both physical and emotional discomfort. And I think
Hmm.
it's a really, really important part of the journey, even though it sucks, right? Um, so, how do we fail forward? At the point that my job was terminated, it was also the point that my marriage, was I was going through a divorce,
Mm,
right? And, I was 40 years old, right? So it's always these decades that kind of trip you up, right?
yeah.
But it is an opportunity to really feel the emotions, throw yourself the depression party. A good friend of mine who's a psychologist said, sometimes you just have to throw yourself a depression party and take a day or two and make yourself the big chocolate cake and, eat it all up and put on your dark colored glasses and just be with your feelings that like this sucks. No
Yeah.
one wants to be terminated. No one wants their marriage to fall apart, but life has these elements and we can we can survive our emotions, right? Emotions come and they go, right?
Yeah.
Unless we try to pretend they don't exist. But if we let ourselves feel them, then they can go. So, that period of life, and it's it's nice when you get terminated without cause and you get a nice severance. I had a,
Yeah, there you
there was
go. Reason to
there was
celebrate.
exactly there, I was, paid for many months of without needing to work. So that was really, really nice. But it gave me the chance to actually do the hard work of introspection and ask myself, like, what do I want? Right. And it gave me again that sense of, you know, I like this environment, right? And I don't need to have, I don't need to live into this potential that doesn't work for my life, and understand my, values, aptitudes, and figure that out. So my, the next chapter has been, you know, really positive until this, ADHD diagnosis and menopause and, now what moment. And now I'm kind of on the other side. I feel like this happens sort of every decade.
Yeah,
Um,
well, that's it.
I,
Every chapter's got its
every chapter.
super highs and super what the hell
Yeah,
just happened? Like what's
exactly.
next? What's that? I mean, now I think, we're old enough, dare I say, that it almost comes to be expected that, what are the 50s going to bring us? Right?
Right.
Like that's going to be, I mean, who knows what the next thing is, but again, that's learning and growing from the not perfect stuff. And I think it's really important, and I know you built on it, but I want to revisit what you said about taking the time to accept and acknowledge the bad stuff and not always needing to feel like we've got to look at the bright side of everything, right? There might be a bright side, but I mean, I go through this. I mean, my wife and I talk about things. Sometimes we just say, like, just let me feel shitty for a day, like it's our nature to try to cheer people up and to just, see where things are good and bad, but sometimes bad just sucks. And right? And it's important to be able to wear that for however long you need to feel comfortable. It's like whether it's grieving, whether it's loss of a job, whether it's whatever, major or minor, right? No one gets to dictate what's important to you because people don't understand how stuff makes you feel. Um, so, I mean, that was, I mean, I know that wasn't necessarily an answer to a question, but that was a really good way to address. I think, a little while ago I said, like, what does success look like to you now? I think you kind of got there and really walked us through how it's led from what it was told to you that it looks like, and maybe you kind of forced yourself to accept, to now, like, I get it now. We never get it 100%, but I think, you've got a realization, and the diagnosis has helped. Um, what would you say to, I mean, there's going to be a lot of people, I think, listening to this who might be, you know, in and around our age, maybe asking themselves questions or feeling things, and, whether or not they need a diagnosis or not, who knows? But, what do you say to them about what they should do if they've just been kind of living confused and things don't feel right? And maybe a lot of the stuff you're saying is resonating with them right now. Should they just go out and start asking more of the tough questions of the medical community first, or not necessarily?
Question. I mean, I think that there's, um, I mean, with the internet and everything you can find online, I think that's probably a great first step. Um, you know, if you have this feeling kind of that like I've just never quite fit into the norms, which is, sort of what the ADHD experience is, then, there's some like quick online quizzes that you can do. Like, do I have ADHD? And it'll kind of give you a
Mm,
sense of whether you might want to invest in a diagnosis. Because, I mean, truth be told, like getting a diagnosis is expensive.
mm,
And we're not at a place, in our, publicly funded healthcare system that I think it's available publicly. So, I am not going to mince words. Like my diagnosis cost me $3,000, and I'm very lucky to have, um, a benefits plan that covered 100% of that. So get a job in the university sector.
Yeah.
If you think you have
That's the first step.
ADHD,
Yeah, exactly.
that's the first step. Don't underestimate your benefits. So, is it, is it worth the investment? I did some of the internet things before I did the actual diagnosis, and I asked my GP, I said, like, I think I have ADHD. Can I just try a stimulant? Can you just put me on something? And then if it works, then we know I have ADHD, right? Because, a stimulant for a non-ADHD brain would kind of make you go, blah, 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 right? It would stimulate you a
Right.
lot, but for someone with ADHD, it grounds you and helps you focus. Okay, so a doctor can't prescribe a stimulant unless you actually have a diagnosis that's usually performed by a psychologist. But that can be expensive and it's time consuming to get it, so it might not be possible. Uh, what I feel is that the medication alone is not the cure all. I thought that, if I just took a medication, like boom, I would be better. There are a lot of sort of daily like life hacks that are really helpful. So like YouTube is a wealth of resources. I get the Attitude magazine, ADD, Etude, and they have a bunch of amazing things. There's a group called Flow that people come on and together work on their own tasks, but staying on Zoom to sort of provide a little bit more accountability.
Hmm.
So there's all kinds of like hacks that you can do um, that don't involve getting a diagnosis, and those would be a really good step if you are looking to find ways to live your life, with better executive function or make up for a lack of executive function. Um, uh, without being able to get a diagnosis.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm gonna find, and I'll vet them with you. I'm gonna find maybe one or two of those quizzes and share them here, because I always still have a worry about Dr. Google and people going down the wrong rabbit hole, but definitely taking the resources that are out there that give the right message is huge. And as you pointed out, probably more cost effective than running right to
Right.
diagnosis.
Right. But the problem is, you're absolutely right. There are so many tools. And once you start Googling, you get ads up the wazoo, right?
Right.
And if you're interested in exploring your own mental health, you're gonna, you can get really hyper focused on that. And
Yeah.
there's no end. So, I get, I don't know, like probably 10 ads a day for like ADHD resources that hacks and tools and programs that all cost money that can change my life. And they're all really interesting and I don't know how to choose. So, so there is sort of a caution with, yeah, consulting Dr. Google and the impacts that it has
Yeah.
after you do that. But
Y-
I can definitely give you some of the things that I've found helpful.
Great. Yeah.
And they're good. They're even now meetups for people to, they call it the word they use is body doubling. And for many of us, just doing something while we have another body like in the room helps us actually get it done.
Hmm.
So the meetup groups where people, go on like at 9 a.m., everyone shares what their goals are. And it could be anything from like doing the laundry and, cleaning, grooming the dog, or something, more substantial. And then, at the end, everyone's just on at the same time, trying to do their tasks and then come back and say, how did we do on those tasks? There are
Hmm.
ones that exist where people talk. There are ones where you just type into the chat, ones where, a moderator will play different kinds of music, but there's no pressure, and you ask yourself, like, how's it possible that it works? But it does,
Yeah.
right? And I think of, we talked about my high GPAs and how I did well in school. There were all of these things that are now called hacks or tools, or that I just somehow knew to do, right? Like in university, when I had to study for an exam, I went to the library and I sat with others, and that was body doubling, right? There was a physical person near me that
Yeah.
was doing the same thing, studying, even if it wasn't the same material, right?
Yeah, that's
school.
it's a big thing. I mean, we try versions of that here too. I mean, we've done, accountability partners is something we've got here where people state their goals to another colleague of theirs here just so almost so that they put it out into the universe where someone else knows about it, right? That person's not going to pressure them to get it done necessarily, but they will ask the question a week later and say, "How'd that go?" Right? And to your point, it's not always just about the work they need to do. It could be about just a small personal thing. And yeah, you've got my wheels are turning now too. I spoke to my oldest daughter yesterday, and she was talking about how she needs to have AirPods in class and soft music playing while the teacher is speaking, which to me, for someone who doesn't get it, right? I'm sitting here going, well, how could you focus more on a sound that's in front of you by adding sound, to your ears?
Right,
But
right,
it very much could be a version of what you're saying, where it's, these are hacks that people need to center their attention or whatever it is. And it works for her. So I'm not saying
right.
don't do it.
Yeah,
I'm questioning how a teacher is okay with someone seemingly listening to music while they're talking, but they're okay with it. So it's great. Um, but this is also a really important, I think, progress that's miles from where it needs to be, but in the understanding of society of things like this, right? You talked about 20 years ago, it wasn't diagnosed, arguably because people weren't looking at all the same questions or all the same factors and all that. But
yeah,
it's it's
yeah,
it's just a really cool story, and
yeah.
I'm really I mean, I'm really happy that you were able to come to the diagnosis and that it's got you in a self-aware space you weren't in before that.
Right. Well, and I when we first spoke, I'm actually just coming back. It's my first week back after a 3 month health leave that, was probably related to burnout. And I think I actually, from my diagnosis to the self-acceptance, throw it up all in the air, I don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
Um, that led to um, pretty crappy performance review that
Mm,
really triggered my, the rejection sensitivity, um, and was strongly advised to take some time, and I did, and getting that reset moment. I'm really lucky that I could, and that my employer supported that. But getting those months of reset to actually, stop, think, learn, move my body, has brought me into September with a very different attitude, just feeling so much more grounded and capable, you know, and with tools. I had the opportunity to try things out. And, had I just continued in the rat race, I don't think that I would have um, been able to do that. And one of the things that I'm doing, this is just my first week back, but I am staying focused on one thing at a time,
mm,
right? And I can't believe how many things I was trying to do at the same time, before I started this leave. I can't be in a meeting and also be responding to texts and chats and, emails and be engaged in the meeting. And so I'm developing the discipline to just be in the meeting. If it's worth my time to be in the meeting, then I'm going to be there and I'm going to give it my all. Right.
yeah.
And I'm going to chunk out other time to just do, just emails or respond to other things. And, this is challenging because the norm is that when you get, a chat, a text over certain mediums, it's expected, or I don't know if it's expected, but it's the norm that one replies immediately. But you
Right.
can't reply immediately and still stay where you are. So
Right. Well, that's
those
it. As
those are
as
going to
much as
be
people
big
think
lessons.
multitasking is the norm, and credit to those. I mean, I try to do multiple things at one time, but the reality is you're still doing one thing at a time. You're just dissecting and breaking up each thing into harder to manage,
Right,
pieces instead of focusing. That's why when we do a call like this, the phone might be next to me, but it's upside down and it's on silent because
right,
even if I saw the light
right,
flashing or heard the dings or those things, we're
right,
wired and we get triggered, like you said, to say, "Oh man, I wonder what that is," or "Do I need," or "Is it urgent," or "Do I need to respond?"
right.
The world will wait
The
for
world
us.
away.
The
I
world
want to
will
say
wait.
one more thing about the world and the work world. I just saw, like, I think came up on one of my social feeds that I try to limit. It said, sitting is going to be the new cigarettes of our generation. So
I can see that.
um, I'm deeply concerned for all the people that I see sitting. I don't know if you know that my side hustle is I'm a fitness instructor.
Mm.
So right now, I'm at a standing desk. I can move around. I'm engaged. I'm not sure if you are too, standing.
This is a standing desk, but I'm sitting right now,
But
so
you're
now I
sitting
feel
at it,
guilty. But
right?
I promise I'll raise it when we're done.
Okay, raise it at some point. But I'm very, very concerned about the amount of sitting that people are doing and the impact on our brains and our bodies of, you know, not moving around. I have a prediction, especially with smartphones, that, how humans evolved from being on all fours to being, Homo erectus and being able to stand up. But with the way we're now sort of crunching over our devices, I'm scared that we're going to be evolving as a species to something that might, look more like our ancestral beginnings and being back on all fours, because our spines are going to lose the abilities to be able to be straight. So,
It's not impossible to see.
yeah,
It's more common than not out there that everybody's crouched and hunched and
right.
sitting.
And so everyone has back pain. So there's,
Yeah.
so investing in one of these sit stand desks, or putting your computer up on a, on a, like a, your kitchen countertop, these things are all really healthy. You know, I've wanted to do standing meetings in my office. I have right now a sitting table in my office, but I think I might bring in a coffee table and, force people to stand and see how they do. But they already say I'm too energetic for them. I maybe can do that in the afternoon.
Ah,
So
it's that they're being resistant. Keep at it.
try
They'll come
it.
around when they start saying their backs hurt when they come to work every day. Well,
Exactly.
that's like a little bonus tip there for everybody.
A bonus tip.
If you're
What, what,
listening or
what,
watching this and you're sitting, just stand up now, stretch it
just
out.
stand up, stretch, move around, move around. I want to say one more thing about career, because this was a big realization after, so many years in the career world. I've realized that, your day job can't be all of what you do for many people, right? Like there's realities, and, life today with inflation, especially if you're in Toronto, like it is expensive. And so our jobs, are a piece of our whole sense of sort of fulfillment in the world, but they can't be everything. And so I think that, you know, having some side hustles, having some volunteer work that feels meaningful, looking at our career and our vocation more holistically than just
Mhm.
being our day job is also, a nice thing to do. So, for me, I've got, a side hustle as a fitness trainer. I, teach like a group class once or twice a week, and then a little side hustle as a career coach. If, my former students come back to me and they're like, you help me, I want to help you, I'll help them again. And then volunteering and having something meaningful that, that you can do. So all of those pieces, at almost 50, I've learned that one job can't be your whole career, much like, one spouse can't be your whole social world. We need our friends, we need our community, we need our connections. And so looking at our lives in a more holistic way is definitely helping me, feel better and be better.
Absolutely. And you're a model of an individual approach to living your life too. I think, you touched on it sort of. People live, whether it's through social media or the internet or whatever, imposter syndrome is a real thing. People, more than not, people live with. And it's hard to acknowledge that you're your own person and you don't need to be what society's telling you to be or what your parents told you or whatever. And we get that. Not everybody gets there at all. I was going to say we all get there and figure it out. Sometimes some people live their whole life doing what's expected of them and looking at posts and saying, how come I'm not that good? And how come I'm there? And why am I? So I think the advice that you give about, doing what feels good, diversifying your life a little
Right.
bit
Right.
is so important that, it's not even worth me saying if you take one message from this podcast, because there's too many that you've shared. If people do want, I mean, you mentioned, you do a lot of things. If people want to find you, is there, let's say somebody's out there saying, I could really use her for some career counseling right now. Is that only limited to students who went through the program?
No, I'm happy to help. I guess the best way is, find me on LinkedIn. I don't have a website. It's just sort of something that I
Yeah,
do when
no
people
problem.
are approach me. But on LinkedIn, Alyson Gampel, with a Y, I can be found.
Right on. Well, there and call her Allie when you reach out to her.
Oh, yeah, we didn't
We
talk
didn't
about
even
that.
talk about
We
that,
didn't
which was
talk about
that
that.
was a big kind of, I mean, I don't know what the right word is. I don't know if growth is the right word, but I think just, the part of your journey just really
Yeah,
self, I don't know,
right.
self-awareness, self-identification. Like
Yeah.
what's happened? Like I've known you up until today as Alyson.
Right, right. Yeah, so I think, 20-year-old me, when I enter, I would my friends, everyone that, in my life always called me Allie, and I liked it. And Allison was that thing that someone called me when they were mad, right? Allison, Lori Gampel, when, you were in trouble for something. And so I always preferred Allie, but it, felt so juvenile. So when I entered the workforce feeling like a total imposter, at 20 in management consulting, I figured I would sound more professional if I went with, the full name Alyson. It sounded just so much more mature. And it just sort of stuck with me in my professional world. And it was only in the past couple of years that I realized, I don't like it. I don't like the sound of it. And so I'm trying to, ask to be called Allie, just because I like it. It's, that's what my friends call me. And, I love people and, just want to be able to be authentic kind of who I am. So I don't take offense if people call me Allison, if you've known me as Allison, you're my whole life. But I do like Allie. It's a little bit more fun and friendly.
Yeah, no, I'm good. You're Allie for the long haul with me now. You're never going to hear Allison from me ever again. But
But you
have they at work? Are you Allie now as well, or is that sort of something people are kind of gradually trying to get into?
it's hit and miss. We had for a while another Allison joined the team. And so I said, like, let her be Allison and I'll take Allie. And that was how I started making the
Perfect.
switch. It's been a little bit of hit and miss. I haven't, I think there's a technology part I have to do. I have to change my screen name on my Zoom so that I haven't done that yet. So I think people see us more in, workstate um, on Zoom. So
Mm.
I'll have to take that on.
It's wild the things we have to think about now. Like it's not just like, hey, one day I'll change my driver's license or whatever. It's like the Zoom, the social, all the things. People come to know us with what we put
Yeah.
out there.
Do,
But
do you have
my
anything similar? But Daniel, Dan, Danny, do you have anything that you prefer?
I was never Danny, and I'm still not Danny. I think that was brought on by the New Kids on the Block. I really didn't like Danny from the New Kids, and I didn't want to be associated with him. But Daniel, Dan, I mean, I'm pretty easygoing with that. And if I look up when you say it, then it was okay. But if somebody says Danny, I kind of just keep walking.
Excellent.
But but yeah, people again, like I know what makes you comfortable, know what makes you happy, and roll with it, right? It's the just do it mentality. And it was
Yeah,
actually an interview I did with another person on this podcast. It was all about just do it, really. It was,
just
you
do it.
know, this
But I
is
think that,
this
but I think
sorry.
there's also a balance between, do what makes you happy now and do what makes you happy in the future. And so I don't
Hmm.
want, this conversation to just stick to, don't do hard things or we can't do hard things. We should
Right.
do hard things and we can do hard things. And we just have to decide why we're doing them. Are we
Yep.
doing them, for our own goals? Are we not doing them because we're afraid, right? Is that fear for good reason, or is that fear something that we should, take a deep breath and work through? And so I don't want to, so we can do hard things. We should do hard things. I should have gone to law school, right? I
Well,
didn't go out
maybe,
of fear.
maybe,
I mean,
maybe.
I probably would have ended up kind of doing the same thing in my life. I don't think I would have been a Bay Street lawyer. I would have been, miserable there. But um, you know, because I didn't do it just because I was afraid that I wasn't good enough, that wasn't the right reason.
Hmm.
So if I could give advice to my 20-year-old self, I would have done it, right?
Yep.
And I would have then been a lawyer doing whatever I chose to do with that down the road.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
that's it. I mean, we know, or we don't. We maybe we don't know. We sometimes we need to take a step back and really understand the why to what we're doing, instead of just doing all the time. So when I say just do it, it doesn't mean, hey, because it's there or because it seems like what you need to do right now. Like,
right.
you mentioned that the nature of the way you are has been living in the moment, and maybe not being as analytic in those things, but you do need a certain element of understanding what's the reason I'm doing this and where am I headed. for sure. Because goals don't live in a vacuum today only. Your goals are a year out, 10 years out. You don't need to know what they all are. I like the fact that the world comes at us 10 million miles at a time. Like that's exciting to me, but it's nice to have a path
Yeah.
also.
And I think the word that I've used in my career coaching practice is a vision, right? A
Yep.
vision, not a plan. So sort of what is that guiding thing that aligns your values and your interests and your passions, right? So, you know, I know my career vision is about, people in business, creating how people can be effective for their businesses and how businesses can be effective through their people, right?
Hmm.
And then there's kind of sub goals under that inform what I do, or I shouldn't say sub goals, sub visions, right? And
Hmm.
coaching fitness is a part of that vision because it helps people be healthier, which helps them be happier and more productive and balanced and whatnot. So I think the idea of vision, career vision, life vision, just helps us make informed choices because especially now there's so many choices that always come at us. It's hard
That's
to
right.
know which
And
to
so
which to
many of
take
them are
on.
telling you they're the right answer, right? And only you know what is, it's hard to sift through what you're being told and identify what's actually important and exciting to you versus, what you're being told to think is important and exciting to you because it's a fine
Right?
line and not everybody can see the difference. So, take time to reflect. I mean, it's great you were able to take some time to just kind of center and experiment with how you want to, live life. It's really, hey, this has been a really cool talk. And I mean, I could go on for another 2 hours, but neither of us, I guess, has 2 more hours to talk today, unfortunately. Maybe there'll be a part
But
two to this
sounds
down the
good. I'd
road.
love this has been really, really fun. Thank you for the
Yeah.
opportunity. As I said, this is the first time I've ever been on a podcast. So you've definitely broken the
Was
ice really nicely for me. Thank you
was it
so
everything
much.
you hoped it would be and more?
And more, so much more, so much more.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, thanks again. And no doubt we will be chatting again soon. And I think there's a lot of people out there who are going to be really inspired and motivated by this, which is all we can ask is people to just take one little thing from all the little things you put out there in your story.
Awesome. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Thanks again. Take care. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Just a Number. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, it would mean the world to me if you could take just a second to subscribe, hit that like button, and leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you think and what you'd like to see in future episodes. And if you're really feeling generous, leaving a review helps even more people find the show. Whether you're listening or watching, your feedback means a ton. Also, don't forget you can catch every episode on YouTube. Just click the link in the show notes or search for Just a Number podcast on YouTube to join me there. Thanks again for being part of the journey, and I can't wait to see you next time.